All right, welcome to the show. We got a great show for you today. We have a special guest with us. We're going to get to it right away because he's got to go. So he's a friend of the show. You've seen him before. He is an economist. He teaches at Brown University. He accurately predicted Brexit and the election of Donald Trump. He's the author of numerous books, including the latest, ANGRY-NOMICS, which is a dialogue between Eric Langrum and himself. Please welcome Mark BLYTH. Hey, Mark, how are you?
I'm good, Jimmy. It's good to be back.
So let's get right into it. You have this new book. It's called ANGRY-NOMICS, right? And, I think I've quoted you so many times on this show, and I'm sure I butchered the quote, but, you talk about the elite and how they live in the Hamptons, and the Hamptons is a low-lying area, hard to protect. And so this new book calls for ANGRY-NOMICS. It calls for radical economic solutions. Can you first tell me what are some of the radical solutions we need, and then tell us what problems it fixes?
All right. So that's a bit of a weird way to get into it because you do the solutions before you define the problems, but we'll go with it, right?
Okay.
So the way we end up on this is to say, look, there's lots of things you can wish you can do, right? We can wish that we get control of Congress and the White House and everything else, that the American state hasn't spent 40 years breaking itself apart, hollowing it up and destroying the whole thing. And then we can basically take, modern monetary theory, and then we can just do all that and everything will be fine. That's a long shot. Just getting the political power in place to do that type of stuff is a long shot. So what can countries do in less than brilliant circumstances? Number one, everybody should have what we call a citizens' wealth fund. This isn't our idea. Lots of people have written about it, but here's the difference. Let's think about what's going on just now. It's the usual outrage. The Fed has went from cutting interest rates to make sure that investors don't make losses, the old model, to actually saying, if you buy any of this stuff, we'll buy it too. And that means there's a floor and it will never fall before the floor. So I guarantee you won't make losses. So we have an economy in which we're throwing people out in the labor market with no unemployment protections after the $600 is gone. But if you own assets, if you buy ETFs, if you have stocks, if you have bonds, don't worry, we got your back. Well, how about doing something that actually benefits most people for a change? Every time there's a huge screw up like this in the financial sector, investors dump all of their equities. What do they want to buy? That terrible thing called government debt, because it turns out it's basically rich people's money. It's basically as good as cash, but it has a positive return. These days, long-term is negative, which works in our advantage. Now, what does this mean? We could issue 20% extra of GDP in bonds and have all of them bought at basically no cost to us at a negative real rate. We take all the cash and then we take all of the equities that have been dumped by all these investors and we buy them on behalf of the people. We then put them into a completely passive, professionally managed, hands-off Congress fund. And then you just ride what's called the equity premium, which is 4 to 6% a year, compounded over a decade. 20% of US GDP is $4 trillion. If you grew $4 trillion at 6% a year compounded, you could take out all the student loan debt. You could do a green transition, and you could make a hell of a dent in inequality across every metric, and it wouldn't have cost a cent in taxes. That's just one idea.
So this sounds like the win-win mentality, right? So everybody wins in this situation and nobody loses. And so what you basically do is you create an investment fund for regular people. And if you can get you at 6% of GDP, that's a lot of money. And so then we would be able to finance all the social programs from now until kingdom come if we did that. It sounds like it. Why haven't, first of all, can that work? Has that worked anywhere else? And what makes you think that can work?
So it's worked for lots of countries that you don't want to replicate because most of them are either carbon exporters like Norway. Nice place, but let's face it, they made the money off of oil, right? Or the United Arab Emirates or Russia. So most of these countries basically bank lots of dollars and then they don't know what to do with them. So they get professional investors to go buy 0.5% of everything. Abu Dhabi is the classic fund for this. And then over time, that just makes a ton of cash. Well, why don't we take that, particularly in the United States, because we print the dollar and we can effectively buy those dumped equities at a discount and then just hold them in trust for the people who are ultimately the backstop of those investors, the American voter, the American taxpayer. Seems only fair to me. And I didn't have to raise anybody's taxes to do it.
So what is the impediment to doing this then?
None. There is literally none. There is only a lack of political will. You want to know what the thing is? Really, at the end of the day, the Wall Street crowd don't want this, because at the end of the day, it means everybody else gets to share in the wealth. It also means that you might make their portfolio allocation a bit more complex, because you're a big player in their market as well. But the other one is the mentality of the Democrats. When you've got people like Pelosi and even Biden referring to PAYGO again. Oh my God, PAYGO, right? How could you fund anything? How could you fund a Christmas party when you've got PAYGO? Yeah, it doesn't seem to bother the Republicans. Like, there's never a question of like, oh, the military needs another $1 trillion for X, right? Let's go see if we can find a PAYGO for it. That never happens. But anything that we actually want, oh, PAYGO, lockbox.
And so if people don't understand what PAYGO means, it means if you have any new programs that you want to institute, anything that helps people, like a healthcare program or a student debt relief or anything, a jobs program, whatever it may be, that you first have to raise the revenue for it, or you have to cut in the budget somewhere else. You can't ever raise the debt, which is ridiculous, because they just gave $5 trillion to the richest oligarchs in the country without paying for it. And that just proves Stephanie Kelton's point of modern monetary theory, that the budget has no relationship to the amount of tax revenue we generate. So let me just ask you, you call it ANGRY-NOMICS. So explain what that's about.
So just for the past 30 years, I mean, just look around just now at the country we live in, Jimmy. I don't think I've ever seen this place more pissed off. I don't think I've ever seen people so angry. And you can talk about the effect of social media and this, that, and the next thing. But you know what? Germans are pretty angry. The Chileans, just before everything closed down with COVID, they were furious. They were having riots over inequality. People in Hong Kong are pretty angry. The Yellow Jackets in France are pretty angry. So what's been going on, and this is stuff that we've spoken about before, we've had a 30-year period of growth where there's been, all the returns have gone to the top. It's been captured by an elite. That elite has basically ran politics to their own ends. And that disjuncture between the economy is doing great, everything's going fine, and the lived experience of ordinary people, that's just no longer tenable. That's what Brexit was about. That's what Trump was all about in its inception, right? Where it's gone now is an entirely different thing. But what was driving everything, the Yellow Jackets in France, Brexit, the whole lot, was just this notion that you've been selling us a bill of goods for ages. When you had Senator Clinton turning up in the bits of the Midwest that she deigned to go to, celebrating Obama's legacy and saying, hey, unemployment's at 4%, it was forgetting that wages in those counties that she visited were basically just above minimum wage.
Yes.
That these were formerly prosperous areas that have been on the down for around 30 years. And you can tell that story right across the developed world. So part of the book is telling us how we got there, why we're so angry, and then the last part, as we were talking about, was the solutions. Because
it's very important, I think, that part of the book where you explain why we got so angry, because I'm in a unique position where I'm just as much in the regular person world of blue-collar America as I am in the elite Hollywood world, right? And so in the regular blue-collar world, everybody knew that Donald Trump got elected because people were in desperate straits, and dire straits and desperate times, and they were willing to take a chance on a loudmouth Yankee who should have had his ass kicked a long time ago, as the Waffle House cook told me, from Virginia, right? So... if people, when I would go to parties in Hollywood, those people would say Donald Trump got elected because of racism. And so, you know, they have no nuance. You can't, yes, of course, there's racism in America, but there's always been. Why do we all of a sudden get Donald Trump, this guy? So it's important to explain to people. So right now you see lots of celebrities, blue check Hollywood, I call it, going on social media telling people you have to vote for Joe Biden as if that is a solution to our problems. Is that a solution to our problems, Mark?
Well, it's certainly better than the chaos and blatant, forget dog whistle, the blatant racism and race baiting that Trump is indulging in. This is a terrible administration.
Yes.
If he wins again, we walk out of the Paris Accords. We actually harm the entire planet, not just ourselves with our selfishness, right? Okay. So there's a lot at stake. And, you know, Biden may not be perfect, but let's not make perfect the enemy of good enough. right? Let's just go with that one. No, in terms of the race thing, it's absolutely true that every racist who was out there was not voting for the non-racist candidate. But I don't think there's been a 70% rise in the number of racists in the United States. In fact, if you look at opinion polls, on average, people are less racist. So what is it that we're concerned with? We're rightly concerned with structural and institutional forms of racism that disproportionately impact African Americans, and that is completely and utterly legitimate. That's not the only thing that's driving not just Trump, however, but these types of anger outbursts and these types of political movements, both on the left and the right, that have appeared throughout the world over the past 10 years, basically.
So the angry-nomics that we've seen, the anger we've seen erupt in cities across America, what I was saying, Mark, is that you would not have seen those protests had they just received their second $2,000 check during a pandemic. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and the good guy in the race won't even give people health care. What is the solution to this? Because we live in a failed state. It's become clear that our current system has collapsed. The current system is exposed as serving only a handful of people. So how long do you think we're going to be in denial of this truth?
Well, the real question is, how long can American voters continue to vote for someone who undermines their own lives? Right? I mean, essentially, you have a politics that, as you say, benefits a very, very small part of the population. I'm part of that. Literally, I'm fine, right? Trump gets reelected, I get a tax cut. That's what's going to happen, right? But what's going to happen to wage stagnation? Do you think there's going to be a huge increase in the real wage for ordinary workers?
Nope.
Right? All the talk about onshoring, if it happens, it becomes robotics. It's not going to filter down. So what we've got is huge levels of industrial concentration, which allows local labor markets to be basically what economists call monopsonies. That is to say, you don't have any way to influence the price of your labor, and the employers collude to keep it down. Right? We have this in non-compete contracts and a whole host of different forms. None of that's going to change if we continue on this path. Now, the key thing is, though, at the end of the day, look at the opinion polls. 40% of eligible voters seem to think that those policies are okay. And if they do, and if enough of them turn out, and if enough Democrats don't show up, then you're going to get more of the same. Things are sustainable until people think they're not. And if that's what they want, that's what they can vote for.
So, yeah, I mean, they don't, there's every election in my lifetime, you know, the winner has been, right? It's been Goldman Sachs, the military industrial complex, Big Pharma, the health insurance company, and fossil fuel companies. That they win every election. There's no way to vote against those in any election. So that's, to me, that's the problem. They're pretending that voting for Joe Biden, who created the military, I mean, created the prison industrial complex, Joe Biden, who voted for Iraq, who did Libya, who did Syria, who made it harder for people.
Don't forget, was one of the main authors of the 2006 bankruptcy bill, which means that you can't default on your student loans. Right? Let's not forget that one.
Or get rid of your medical debt in bankruptcy. Yeah. So it's like we got, again, it's the same thing we had 4 years ago. We have two shit sandwiches. The guy won't even, you know, if there's, because right now it looks like it's going to be a neck and neck race. Trump is narrowing the gap, which is amazing to me that this unbelievable clown is still in striking distance. It's just shows the failure of our political system. And I love your idea, like that idea you had at the top about how we can actually finance stuff for everybody and you can't really complain about it. What is another radical solution to some of our problems that you have in the book?
Well, one of the ones that we advocate in the book is what we call helicopter drops. So stop doing all this fancy stuff with banks and the Fed and quantitative easing and all this opaque nonsense. Guess what? Just mail people checks until the recession's over and then stop. And it turns out we were doing that. Or at least every country around except the US was doing that.
Yes.
Because when I say mail checks, right, here's the interesting thing, right? Long before we started dismantling the post office, let's not even get to that, right? Why are we using a 19th century technology to send people money in an emergency? Because you don't really want them to get it. Because if you did, you would give everybody a Treasury Direct account, and you would reverse it, and you would just send the money straight to their account, and it would be there in 24 hours. Because that's what you can do when the Fed turns on the tap for business. All the plumbing runs that way. None of the plumbing runs to ordinary people. But there is a pipe. They could have taken that pipe and connected it to every bank account in the United States. but they chose not to. And what does that tell you? Because they didn't really want to do it. Now, everybody else out there, even the Brits, have been doing a wage furlough for 6 months. Now, there is a legitimate question about how long you want this to continue, because in big economies, people change their jobs. They change their jobs because sectors become redundant, new things come up, whatever. If you keep everyone frozen in amber for a whole year and then you stop, what if the jobs aren't there, right? You haven't enabled them to retrain to get out. So there's definitely, it's not a be all and end all, but nonetheless, it's a better, cheaper way of not causing a crisis and a recession. We half-assed did it. All the European countries did a reasonably good version of it, so it's already been done, right? The radical proposal, we've already proved it can be done. This is just like you said about Stephanie Kelton's point about the deficit. You spend, then you tax to justify the spending, right? You don't tax, then spend. And we're literally proving this every day. But the minute, of course, the Democrats get in, what are they going to do? What's the word? Pay-go.
Pay-go. Austerity, right? Austerity, basically, right?
Well, yeah, austerity. I mean, but the way that I think about that is like you're actually believing this, the fairy story that if you make the recession worse, that will improve investor confidence and they'll shower you. I don't think the Democrats are saying that, but the Democrats are still caught in this idea that the way to appeal to sort of centrist voters is to be desperately concerned about the national debt. I don't think that your average voter lies awake at night going, hey, honey, is it 107% or do we net it out to 73? I don't think they're doing that.
So can I ask, you identified the fact that they did not want to bail out the American people with the CARES Act or any of these acts. So, but it doesn't, I always think of what FDR said to his rich friends was, hey, if you don't give them some of your money, they're going to come and take all of our money. And so can't they see that it would actually help their economy if people had money in their pockets to spend? Because this is a consumer economy. Even I know that. So go ahead.
So when the pandemic hit, what was the standard model? This is going to last 3 to 6 months. So we stiff people for 3 months. By the time it's over, they'll all be back at work. American labor markets are incredibly flexible. People move for jobs, et cetera, rinse and repeat. The only thing is this is not 3 to 6 months. This is going to be 12 to 18. So they massively misplayed the first round of the game.
That's just it? They just miscalculated? It's not that they're rapacious oligarchs and they don't give a shit?
Well, they could be rapacious oligarchs on a 3-month period, but if you're trying to be a rapacious oligarch over a 24-month period, you might end up losing the house in the Hamptons and everything else.
Yeah.
So there's a question of at which point do we get to there?
So
with 40% of voters basically saying, I think Trump's smashing, we're never going to get there.
The problem is that's the people who vote, right? So 100 million people didn't vote last time. So the biggest voting block is the people who don't vote. And that's doubled almost the people who do. So I think there's going to be more social unrest. But let me ask you, I know you have to go. If Biden is elected in November, what immediate demands should the American people make on him?
That's an excellent question. What are the immediate demands? Number one, try and restore some semblance of normalcy to governance so the rest of the world stops thinking you're a failed state with nukes. Just the basic stuff. That would be a good start. Reaffirm the commitment to the Paris Accords immediately and concretely by any means necessary. And depending on the state of the economy at that point in time, you really have to, the very minimum you have to do is cancel interest on student loans. If not, get the Fed to buy the whole lot and stick it on its balance sheet. Because it is just a completely unfair intergenerational burden that no other generations ever had to endure before. And in the current crisis, it's a crushing burden on future growth of the economy for the country as a whole.
And so you've got some great ideas in here. So is there what is the best way? Because right now it seems like, well, there is a Princeton study, I'm sure you're aware of, that showed that we actually don't live in a democracy, that our democracy has been taken from us by the corporations that have hijacked our legislators, right? And that if you're in the upper 10% economic bracket, do your wishes get reflected back in legislation? So what is it? Is there a way? What is a number one way, and besides burning stuff down, or maybe that's what it takes, I don't know, what should we do to get the government to be responsive again to its people?
Well, that one's very straightforward. It's a serious campaign finance. Just basically get the money out of it. The problem is you've now got a stacked Supreme Court that has done the decision from a few years back of Citizens United, which effectively allows corporations to be people, which is crazy because then in that case, I want to be a corporation. It should work both ways, right?
Right.
But now that they're people, they have rights, et cetera, et cetera. So that opened the door to unlimited spend. So even if you did campaign finance reform, there is a chance that it would go to the Supreme Court and then effectively it would get kicked out. So you'd have to be very clever about how you design it. But, this is a long-running battle in American politics. The first $100 million election was only 20 years ago. Now we're doing multi-billion-dollar elections, right? Mm-hmm. When does it stop?
It's too late. I think the global warming is too late. But listen,
Mark. Well, here's the thing.
Okay.
Jimmy, we've got a couple of minutes left. I just say this one. Look, here's the thing that makes me hopeful. I really think that generational change matters. As you get older in your own job, as I am now, you really begin to see what happens when you become kind of like that middle stack, right? You're right there. And you see the young people coming in and the old people filtering out. When I look at this election, I'm looking at Biden, I'm looking at Trump, I'm looking at the anger of the baby boomers. They're angry about the fact that they think they've been hard done by, despite the fact that they got everything on their own terms and they got all their assets bailed out not once but twice.
Yes.
But what's coming behind them is a generation of which AOC and others are exactly the voice that we need, which basically says, no, there's another way of doing this. And when you lot are gone, we're going to do it. It'd be nice if you did it now. It would really help. But we know you're not going to do it. We're going to have to pick up the pieces, and we will. And I think that they will.
Oh, wait. Well, fingers crossed. I really appreciate it. Doesn't every capitalist system create dangerous amounts of power in the hands of a few people?
Not all of them, and it depends on the hands.
Okay.
It's very hard to get upset about the Scandinavians, right? I mean, at the heyday of Swedish social democracy, everybody's favorite example, right? There was probably 5 old white guys, 2 in the trade union movement, 1 in the government, 2 on the business side, that effectively decided what was going to happen and what was not. The difference was their preferences matched up with 80% of the population. The problem is here, the little clique that runs everything, their preferences line up with exactly them and their friends, and everyone else doesn't get anything. That's the big difference.
And so the big problem that people I don't think can understand, like why Brexit happened, why Trump, why we're in this, why it's neck and neck still, is because of income inequality. And it's because of this system run by the banks, neoliberalism, and corporate capture of our governments. And you actually have answers for that stuff, which is fantastic.
So the book as well, just as to sell it a little bit to people, it's written in a completely ordinary way. It's a dialogue between 2 people, right? Mm-hmm. It's not fancy. There's no technical terms. We decided not to write that book. And the core of the book is this thing called Macroangrynomics. Why big financial crashes create a lot of anger. And then we do Microangrynomics. Why an environment where you're constantly being asked to take risk, but at the same time, all the rewards are going somewhere else. That uncertainty creates a great deal of fear, which gets reflected as anger. And we talk about the types of anger that are generated, public and private anger, what we call the weaponization of the energy of tribalism, which is what you see in politics mainly. And then what you see the other side of that is a kind of anger of angels, the desire to be heard, a cry for righteousness. And all of this is what we're seeing in the current moment, and the book tries to make some sense of that.
Well, fantastic. Everybody check out ANGRY-NOMICS. Mark Blythe, thank you very much for taking time being our guest. Good luck with the book. There it is right there. Everybody check it out. Thank you very much, pal.
All the best, mate.
Okay, bye-bye. Hey, everybody, this is the part where I tell you where all our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then this is why I tell you to join our premium program and get extra content, but nobody's got a fucking job. So just enjoy the video.